Hi, Krishna. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. Welcome to part 5, which we expect to be the final installment in this series, Co-Creating the Future of the Krishna Consciousness Movement. Damodar Das. I've been hosting throughout. Krishnendu Prabhu has also joined me. Krishnendu Prabhu, did you want to say a few words just by way of greeting everybody?
Hare Krishna, I'm looking forward to today talking about what we can do positively to move ahead.
Did we just lose you?
I hope not.
I heard you say positively, and I didn't hear any more words. I thought, you might be saying more. Okay, so we've looked in the first couple of episodes in the series at lessons we might learn from history, that the movement is something that started with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's not the domain of one institution. In fact, it ran for several centuries, institution-free. How Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur decided to leverage institutional capability to really take Lord Chaitanya's movement to every town and village. How the movement was destabilized by infighting and personal ambition. Srila Prabhupada came west, fulfilling the order of his Guru Maharaj, and we saw the movement thrive under his personal supervision in the West. We saw the challenges that the movement faced in the immediate wake of Srila Prabhupada's departure. And then we spent a couple of episodes looking at what we should stop doing, what we should continue doing, and this one is the things that we should start doing. There's going to be some real themes here just about strategy. And it's one of those interesting words that lots of people throw about. I don't know if they necessarily always mean the same thing by it. Sometimes people are just trying to elevate the importance of what they do by calling it strategic. But we're really talking about looking into the future, not being content with the here and now, and only preoccupied with the here and now. And we saw, was it Mr. Rubin? Anyway, the gentleman that Srila Prabhupada met on the park bench in New York at that time, maybe Srila Prabhupada didn't even have any followers, and he was already describing schools and farms and temples all around the world, and this gentleman said, I don't know if he had anything going at that time. And Prabhupada had that saying, time only is separating us. So Prabhupada was already thinking way into the future, and he was introducing innovations like Gurukul and Varnashram and so on, because he could foresee the future needs. We still haven't really caught up with how important some of those projects are. If a leader is not thinking about the future and is simply presiding over the status quo and maybe thinks everything's all right with the world because lots of people showed up to my program, then I'm not sure they're being of great service to the community. So I'd love to think we could get serious about planning. How do we take Krishna consciousness to every town and village? Let's say here in Australia or there in New Zealand. I'd love to think that the leaders of the movement are giving careful thought. How will I take it to this corner of New Zealand or this corner of Australia, or conversely throughout the world, this part of Europe, this part of the States, and so on. Making plans, holding themselves accountable to plans, reporting. Now, we have been measuring things like book distribution. It might be one of the only things we really do measure. Someone reads out the book distribution scores. But arguably, why aren't we measuring other things? Attendance at the program, new people chanting japa, new people reading, prasadam plates distributed. And we'll also start to explore things like community sentiment and other things like that. Anyway, I'll pass to you just for some general thoughts on the importance of strategy, Krishnenduji.
I'd just like to come back to a theme that I've been reflecting on for a few years now, which is it seems that our movement has lost its revolutionary spirit. To some extent, we're just trying to become accepted as a mainstream religion and have a sort of, it seems to me, a little bit of a insecurity, something like that, where we want to be accepted as one of the adults in the room, like all these other people in the world who are actually, you know, the people that have got it together, and that what we have to offer is, you know, we don't have that same zeal that we used to have, that we're going to take over the whole world, and we've got something really incredible that we can offer to others that Prabhupada seemed to indicate. His ideas for Varnashram, as you mentioned, schools and farms and the different social system, he had this really strong desire for that. But nowadays it seems we just kind of like want to blend in with everyone else and just add a little bit of charm into it. So that's my somewhat cynical version of how things are these days. And having that strategic vision to say, okay, well, Prabhupada did have this vision. What can we do to move in that direction? You know, let's get the ball rolling again.
And it would be a concern that looking at the content of leadership agendas, what the GBC do discuss, it seems largely reactive. Maybe there are some policy things that are discussed that potentially do lay foundations for the future. We certainly don't hear about, here are the plans of how we take Krishna consciousness further forward and expand the boundaries. Here is some of the key messaging that we might have for the world on various topics and issues. It seems that we're mostly inward looking. And even with the inward looking, not necessarily fully taking care of our communities and so on. So leaders seem quite happy if there's some bright, shiny new devotees to talk to. But I do worry that the sort of, what's the word I'm thinking of? Indifferent to community sentiment, uninterested. And so there seems to be a growing dissatisfaction around people who've been in the movement or around the movement for a few decades. And that doesn't seem to be a major concern, which is a little bit of a worry. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think there tends to be quite a big disconnect between, let's say, the GBC and different levels of management in the society and the, you know, everyday people that are in the society. And I think this is really a focus that needs to be developed, is building those connections and building the bonds amongst the devotees at each level and between these kind of, you know, levels of leadership. That you know, I think you were mentioning in a previous episode that you used to look forward to the GBC resolutions. Oh, you know, what exciting things has the GBC got lined up for us, you know, and our dynamic future strategies and stuff. And then after a while, you realize that that's not what it was. So you lost interest in it. So,
Yeah.
so this type of communication, as well as you know, it goes both ways. Sharing something inspiring, but then also listening. It goes both ways, up and down and sideways. We all around, I think there's a real lack of communication and connection.
And although we're not a centralized, and nor did Srila Prabhupada want a centralized organization, so every temple has liberty and autonomy to do what it wants, I don't know that there's that many strategies at a local temple level. But who is thinking about, you know, the broader organizational mission and whether or not that's happening? Or is it just individuals according to their resources, according to their imagination, are doing things? It doesn't necessarily add up to, I guess, a joined up, cohesive organizational strategy. Any organization does need at least a small group of leaders, and it's one of the functions of leadership to be thinking, where next? What are the challenges? What are the provisions for those challenges going forward? If I'm a frontline worker, let's say in a retail establishment or in fast food or whatever, I'm not going to be thinking beyond the next customer to serve. If I'm, a temple commander, I'm probably worried about, keeping the temple clean, making sure all of the duties are properly staffed. I'm not thinking, where do we want the organization to be 3 or 4 years from now? I'm not thinking, how far afield are we reaching? What provision are we making for the people that we've interested? It's not part of my role, but as you ascend the hierarchy, that is very much the contribution that you're meant to be making. All right, let's have a look at some of the things on our list.
I want to add to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Add to that last thing that you said, because it was making me think about this story about these stonemasons who are building a cathedral. I think you know the story, where one of the roles of the leaders is to connect the frontline workers, as you put it, to the mission. And so the story of the person building a cathedral, one person was saying that, I'm just basically, piling these rocks up here so that I can build this wall and I can get paid, something like that. And then another person was asked, what are you doing? And they said, I'm building a cathedral to worship God, for centuries forward. So it was the same activity, but the vision of that person was much broader and much more inspiring. And when devotees at every level have that connection to the vision and whatever little service they may be doing, there's so much more inspiration behind it.
Yeah, it's a really good point, isn't it? Because cathedrals would take generations to build. So whoever started it would never see the completed product. But they'd still be doing it in the spirit of service to future generations. So I think it's a really interesting point. And I definitely think anyone in leadership should be thinking of themselves as a steward, not that, right, I now have dominion over this project. What do I want to do with my power? I remember when I was a TP many years ago, I had a wonderful advisor in a devotee called Paramakaruna Prabhu. He's passed away now, which is a real shame. But this was a central London temple, Soho Street, Radha Londoneshwara. And we were approaching, I think, the 25th year of its operation. So it was established by Srila Prabhupada in 1969 at Berry Place, and then it moved around 1978, something like that, to Soho Street. And around 93-ish, maybe I became the TP. I'm not 100% clear on the exact time of the year. So 1994 was the 25th anniversary, and we were doing things like renovations and wanting to establish a temple, and we were trying to build the congregational department up so to be slightly less dependent on book distribution as the economic basis for the temple. And Paramakaruna made this really interesting point. He said, we would do well to consider that there have been people visiting Radha Londoneshwara temple, patrons of this temple, since it opened in 1969, way before we were even, I was 2 at that time. And they'll still be visiting long after you and I are memories. So, we would do well to remember that in temple leadership, that we're here to serve those devotees. It was just a interesting point, the idea of servant leadership. I am not the boss of this area. I am a servant entrusted with a particular responsibility. Yes, it might include certain managerial things, making sure the bills are paid and the devotees are fed and things are going on. But it also struck me, here we are in one of the biggest cities of the world, London. What's the plan to make London Krishna conscious? Like, to me, that would be a natural responsibility. If I'm only worried about if I'm paying the bills and, are there enough pujaris, and so on. It's still a noble service, but it's not exactly leadership. Anyway, let's have a look at what we've got on our list here. So I've actually adjusted the order in the last couple of days because I did start with massively increase outreach, but I actually think our ability to reimagine outreach and rekindle that enthusiasm and zeal that you've just referred to that we might have lost a little is probably about really taking care of everybody that's already subscribed to the Krishna consciousness movement. And I often think about this one. How many people since 1965, 66 have had their faith awakened by Srila Prabhupada and have contributed and participated, perhaps even, had the idea of giving my life to this movement, and are now not as active participants in the movement. They may still be chanting their rounds and they may still be, full-on devotees, but something has deterred them, discouraged them, disconnected them from contributing towards the movement and the mission, whether that's preaching to people, even just encouraging them to come to the temple, whether that is, active participation in the temple schedule or anything like that. And it strikes me there's a lot of hurt in this community, a lot of disillusionment. And it troubles me a little that more isn't being done. So much talent, so much experience, and the movement needs it. And it doesn't appear that the leaders are really racking their brains about how to heal this rift and how to re-engage all of that talent. I'll pause to see what you have to say about this.
Yeah, I think this is the most important area to focus on. It comes back to me again and again. Like in the purpose-driven church, there's 5 layers to, the mission, starting from the outreach, like going out on Harinam, doing book distribution. And then that's followed up by something like a Sunday Feast experience, where you're interacting with people for maybe the first time or in the beginning stages. And then the next phase is the phase where people join the community and they become part of the fellowship. So part of this purpose-driven church model really emphasizes the fellowship aspect of it. And in particular, it emphasizes getting devotees to interact in small groups. Like if we go to a festival, we might sit down at prasadam and have a little bit of a conversation. When there's a class, it's one person speaking and everybody listening. It doesn't really give the opportunity to really develop the relationship. And sometimes it develops organically. If, for example, you're part of a project and you're working with a small group of devotees, you might start to interact with each other more. In my personal experience, families who have children of the same age, we naturally want the children to get together, and that's how a natural way that these kind of relationships get developed. But I think it's something that needs to be, consciously developed, not left up to chance, that devotees build these relationships with just a small handful for various reasons. In the purpose-driven church, they talk about how festivals and, like your Sunday feast type of thing, they're like the cruise liner. It's all the attractive and exciting thing that makes people want to come along. But they say that the small groups are like the life rafts that save people from falling into the ocean again. Something along those lines. But I really think this is an area that we need to develop, is building up the relationships with devotees. And as I said before, the small group is really connecting with our peers, perhaps also those that are, our local seniors, and learning from their wisdom. at the same time, I think there also needs to be increased communication, as I was saying before, between the management and the the everyday kind of devotee, that they need to listen, and then they also need to communicate what they have planned, and showing that they care, that they've listened, and what they're going to be doing about what they've heard from the devotees. So in so many ways, it all comes down to communication. But in particular, I think each devotee really needs to have just a few heartfelt connections with devotees that can really make a big difference in battling the storms and surviving the tough times. Because if you don't have those close connections, then when the difficult things happen, it's very hard to deal with it unless you've got support of that nature.
I've mentioned the word engage here, re-engage all the latent talent. And engagement is something that sort of is a big deal in secular society now. They measure staff engagement, they measure customer engagement. And the idea is, all organizations thrive when their people are committed to the organization's purposes. If they stopped caring, then what kind of customer service will there be, or what kind of performance would there be? So organizations want to measure whether or not their culture is optimal or deteriorating, and take swift action if it's deteriorating. If we're running the risk of losing really good people, we want to be aware of where we're failing them and respond quickly so that we don't lose good people. And I was talking earlier about, I think there should be measurement of community sentiment. I'm sure if we did an engagement survey, and it is one of the things that I would actively encourage every temple community to do, we would find a lot of disengagement or suboptimal engagement. And if we looked at causes, I think leadership disenchantment would be a major factor. So I think this is actually quite an important factor here. So I've mentioned here restoring faith. Well, let me just talk about the healing word first. I think there have been a lot of people, and we've talked about this a little in the second episode, about why there might be a lot of hurt people, bad decisions, falling gurus, maybe despotic temple leaders, and all kinds of reasons why, or just unmet needs, or people feeling like they just aren't, no one cares for them anymore, stuff like that. So I think a lot of people are potentially, just in the course of their natural human lives, undergoing some form of coming to terms with what's happened to them and healing. But I don't know that they're healing with the society. That's where I think some leadership efforts should be made. And when I talk of restoring faith here, we did a survey, maybe it was the Matters of Principle page. We maybe did this survey about 2 years ago, asking about people's faith in the GBC. We were trying to evidence to the GBC the need for reform. And these were catastrophic. There was a 5-point scale. We made these positive statements like, I really believe that the GBC is, really properly representing Prabhupada, or making competent decisions, or I trust them, and so on. And something like 90% of the comments were negative. Either strongly disagree or disagree. And I don't know that the leaders appreciate just what a leadership vacuum there is perceived to be. And I think there's a lot of work that they have to do to restore faith. Prabhupada engendered such faith and trust that it actually helped the movement perform in a cohesive way. Now, of course, following Srila Prabhupada was never going to be easy, and it wasn't left to one individual to do. But still, if we look at that one factor, trust in the society's leadership, I think this has had catastrophic failings. So imagine if we did the survey at every temple, and it sort of asked the demographic questions, which age group do you belong to? Which gender are you? What's your station in life? Are you married with kids? And so on. And then it started asking questions. Well, how engaged do you feel by the local community? If you are engaged, why? If you're disengaged, why? What do you look for when you come to the temple? And how do we do in those areas? How might we do better? Then you'd actually have great data. You could see it tracking from year to year. Are we improving our engagement scores? Are they decreasing? Do we have particular engagement successes? Are there particular groups that are especially disengaged that we might want to do different things? It could inform strategic work at a temple level. All right, we've got some clear indicators of what the children would like to see more of, or we've got some clear indicators of what devotees with families are looking for. And then I think you talked about communication, Krishna. Imagine if we really had quality Ishtagostis. Maybe the results of the survey were discussed with the community. Okay, this is what you've told us. We're listening. Tell us more. How could we improve? What shall we do together to have a shared vision as a community? As opposed to at the moment, whatever a temple does is largely the function of the temple president's imagination, or possibly a temple council, but it's not taken as an opportunity to re-engage an entire community. Anyway, those are just a few thoughts there. Back to you.
Yeah, it's interesting you used the word engagement, because that immediately came to my mind that when Prabhupada talks about engagement, he talks about stay engaged in Krishna consciousness. And I think just on a purely physical level, that's an issue. That a lot of devotees feel like, well, what am I to do here? What's my contribution? Like when the kids come to the temple, I mean, it's still pretty much like this. Even here in Auckland, the teenagers kind of come along, and nowadays they're starting to be more kirtan, but aside from that, they would tend to just sit outside and sort of think like, oh yeah, here we are again at the temple waiting for the Sunday feast to come around so we have something to eat. And there's a little bit of a social connection, but it's not like connection to the actual mission. And I think a lot of devotees, and I would put myself pretty much in this category. I'd turn up to a festival and I would think to myself, if I didn't come today, would it make any difference? Would anyone miss me? Is my service needed or valued? Or, have I got a contribution that is needed here? And I think a lot of people fit in that category, that they sort of like think, well, what's my place here? I don't really have anything to contribute. So I think at that level, it's something that the leaders need to think about, is how can we engage all the different devotees so that they have a valued contribution to make, whether it's the children or the devotees that have been around for many years, people in different situations. And then, of course, what you're talking about at a much deeper level is the emotional or inspirational engagement, which I think they are connected, for sure. And a lot of people just keep away because of their bad experiences. So I think that healing that you talk about is really important. The only way that I can see that it can really be addressed is by personalism. Really listening. At the end of the day, that's my definition of what personalism is. The rock star celebrities of our movement, on the whole, they tend to come in for a couple of days, put on a show and go. But what I would really like to see is the devotees taking the time to really sit down and talk and listen and understand where the devotees are coming from. And for me, this is another, what's the word? Another kind of like reinforcement of my idea that the local senior devotees should be given more status, in the sense that it's the devotees that are there all the time that can really develop the relationship at a deep personal level and really help. If someone just comes in and out every 6 months or every year or whatever and just spends a few days, how well are they going to really know the people in that area in a way that they'll feel connected and that they'll actually be able to help them personally? But developing the local leadership so that the devotees who've been around a while become mentors to the other devotees and develop these types of relationships.
Yeah, and whenever I teach engagement as part of secular leadership programs, I always ask people, what would tell you that someone was seriously engaged? What would you see? Now, if I use that same question and explored within ISKCON, it would be people enthusiastically coming to programs and participating. It would be people, yes, coming to an Istagosti and feeling confident that they could share their ideas and that they would be listened to. It would be people only too enthused to introduce other people to the temple and to go out and tell people about, the society, tell people about the mission. And what would be signs of disengagement? People doing the bare minimum. As you say, they rock up, fill up their tiffin and go home. They're not that interested in the class. Perhaps the corridor conversation is more about, the movement's failings. Even if their opinion is asked, they don't feel safe to give it or that it's worthwhile saying anything because who's listening? One of the things I learned, and it was kind of a brilliant, I probably need to credit both Stephen Covey, but also someone called Richard Barrett, this idea that engagement is the natural function or the natural response to feeling like an organization cares about all of my needs, facilitates those needs. I don't mean that we're self-centered exactly, but human beings have needs. So if I'm physically provided for, like a brahmachari that lives in the temple, and I know that I've got a room and I know I've got some prasadam, well and good. But that obviously is not all that's to it. The bigger things that engage would be things like a sense of belonging, that I feel really cared for in this community, like you're talking about. All that, someone recognizes I have ideas to contribute, that my voice is meaningful, that people care that I'm allowed to think and dream and contribute my dreams and those kind of things. And, ultimately that we've got a worthy cause and are making a difference in the world. If I start to wonder whether the movement's ethical, whether in fact we are doing good or more harm, whether it's all about self-serving leadership and so on, then of course it's going to lead to a disconnection. If I don't feel heard, I don't feel that my voice means anything or that my ideas are worth anything to anybody, of course I'll shut down in that area. So it's a really big one, and that's why I think it's fundamentally a leadership challenge, as are just about all of these. Let's progress through the list. So massively increasing outreach. I'm sure individual temples are doing outreach. They might send out a Harinam party. They might have a book distribution party. They might have, community gatherings, bhakti vrikshas, and so on. I'd love to think that it's something that leaders model, exemplify, lead the way, that they actually show by example how these things are done, and that they're actively encouraging, and maybe that we're starting to really measure it as well. Levels of participation, how many people went on the Harinam, or numbers of programs, numbers of people attending programs, or then, as I was saying earlier, people taking practices up like japa and so on. Like one of the things, again, that most mundane organizations do is they measure things. They have a balanced scorecard. Obviously, they measure financial performance, and they're obliged by law to do that. But they measure things like community engagement, and anything they want to improve, they measure. My sense is if we do the healing really well, people will naturally feel like, I want to share this, and I want to encourage more and more people to participate in this wholesome thing that enlivens me. If I'm broken and scarred, I might even have the opposite instinct, which is I need to protect people from going anywhere near this poisonous thing. What are your thoughts, Krishnendu?
Just have a look what's outreach. Yeah. I mean, that famous saying, what gets measured is what gets done. And I'm backtracking a little bit here, but in the purpose-driven church, I believe they talk about the importance of small groups, that they actually count how many different small groups are going on. I know in a local church here, which is called the City Impact Church, they have about 60 different small groups in one church. They basically say that any excuse to get together is good. So they might have like a pregnant mothers group, an embroidery group, a business breakfast. They have all the different reasons that people might get together by having something in common. It could be the Korean language group, but they measure things like that. And by measuring it, then it shows that it has value. Just like it's not so much prominent now, but we used to have the Sankirtan scores, the international book distribution Sankirtan newsletter. And, every month you look for who's the biggest book distributing month. And it showed that that's what our society values. So I think expanding that out, as you were suggesting, to things which indicate not just outreach, but also more engagement and more focus on taking the practices seriously, like you said, japa or reading. Things like that will be helpful to show what we value, what gets measured, gets done. Where's the outreach? And I think another thing, going right back to the original discussion we were having, is it's really important that devotees understand what Prabhupada's vision was, and he gave it in a condensed form in the 7 purposes of ISKCON. And I wonder how many devotees have really looked at the 7 purposes and sort of engaged with those to understand what it was that Prabhupada was trying to achieve. And, more than on just a superficial level. Like Prabhupada was wanting to transform society. He wasn't just about, okay, come here, chant Hare Krishna and go back to Godhead. It was like, okay, we've got this mission that we want to deliver the whole society and, improve things in so many ways for people. It's an incredible vision, and it's right there in the 7 purposes. And I just wonder we'll start with how many leaders meditate on those 7 purposes, or if they're just going through the motions. And then how many devotees are also understanding what that vision of Prabhupada's was, and are the leaders helping the devotees to connect with that? Because if you don't have the vision, then it's like, the old story that in the Bible they have some saying, right, that he who has no vision will perish, or something like that. So it's like, in order to achieve something, we have to know what we're trying to achieve first.
That's right. We don't particularly have any plans. We don't measure how we're doing with regards to any of the metrics of success. So we just open and things happen organically. And this is where I worry that what we have is kind of a playground for preachers who are all, maybe it's good-natured competition, but they're plying their own trade, so to speak, but it's not like there's a stewardship for the society's progress. That's the thing that really I worry about. And I'd love to see that we put in particular plans. What is the plan to get Harinam to every town and village? That was why we started. And it could be other kinds of plans. Let's work our way further down the list a little bit. So developing more carefully thought out messaging. We do have a communications department or ministry, and I have seen that they issue press releases from time to time, again, often issue based. They have just recently released a series of profiling of wonderful devotees and what they're doing, which is very nice. But what I'd love to see is that we take a stand on things that are happening in the world, that ISKCON has a voice. So, you know, it speaks about, you know, maybe this war that's happening or climate change or whatever. And it worries me that we either shy away from those things or we just don't have a consolidated opinion on those things. So again, it's left to individual leaders maybe to come up with what's ISKCON's position on things. I don't think we've even necessarily decided what our position is. And maybe we just have internal scuffles about all of that. I remember, I mean, I think I did mention this, that, what's his name? I've lost his name. The first of the acharyas, Hansadutta. So he was added to the list of people who can initiate on my behalf by Prabhupada because he took on publicly some scientist in Sri Lanka and challenged him. And Prabhupada was really enthused by that kind of stuff. And it's a source of disappointment. I don't know if that's the right word, but that we just don't seem to have a voice on the global stage, that we're not saying, here is where Gaudiya Vaishnavism stands. Do we think it's too much of a hot potato? Are we too keen to just be not ruffling feathers? I don't know what's going on there, but it feels like a missed opportunity. Your thoughts on this one, Nandu?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It seems to me, like you mentioned before, some kind of insecurity that, you know, we want to be accepted and therefore we're not going to rock the boat. And that wasn't Prabhupada's spirit at all. His spirit was to stir things up and to make a challenge and, you know, be in the headlines. He liked that. You know, I mean, an example, when Black Lives Matter came out, ISKCON published their statement. That was the same as everyone else's statement. Oh, yes, you know, I think we haven't treated Black people so well and we're going to do our best to treat, you know, instead of coming in with a unique kind of Krishna conscious angle on it that would stand out amongst everyone else's comments. Instead, we just sort of joined the queue and did our obligatory, you know, yes, well, we like everybody else, and, you know, we're part of this, you know, herd of sheep kind of thing. And that was like an example of a missed opportunity to really emphasize, you know, like our philosophy that we're not the body and whatever it is, you know, there's so many angles that we could have taken as devotees that would have differentiated ourselves, but yet the spirit and the mood of it, and almost every other press release that I've seen is the same sort of thing as well. It's just parroting whatever everybody else is saying and missing the opportunity to, you know, differentiate ourselves.
I wonder if we got worried at some point, spooked even, that we were seen as some kind of weird and dangerous cult, and therefore our strategy became, we're really normal, trust us, we're normal, we're just like you. And therefore
totally,
differentiation. We're too busy kind of trying to blend in or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've noticed that, like, for example, at the Loft, there's a mythology, which may or may not be true. When I say mythology, I don't mean it's necessarily false, but there's this deeply held belief amongst the members that you shouldn't mention the word God because, you know, this is in New Zealand, particularly, you know, in New Zealand, you know, nobody really likes religion, and so if you say God, people are just going to walk out, you know, and so then you get devotees giving the talk, which is all about like Krishna and things like that, and they have to like use words like the supreme or the source, and, you know, things like that, and you sense this kind of unease, this kind of insecurity, and then if someone's listening, the non-verbals are very powerful, right? So someone's speaking and they know that they should say the word God, but they don't want to say the word God, so they're kind of like looking a little bit, and you wonder, like, what have these people got to hide here? You know, there's something weird going on. You know, you can just pick up the vibe. And so I think on a society level, there's a little bit of this feeling too. And this idea that the Hare Krishna movement is considered a cult is such a joke, because just speaking from my experience here in New Zealand, is back in the day, Hare Krishnas were in all the movies, right? And the devotees were the kind of like poster child, it's not quite the right word, but the archetypical cult member, right? Wearing weird clothes, approaching people in the streets, being overly friendly to people, love bombing, and then all that kind of stuff. And so the Hare Krishna movement was very prominent, and it represented the cult, all the cults out there. That was a long time ago. And whether it's been consciously trying to kind of fit in, or it's just because our demographic has changed over time. You know, devotees, the Westerners who are devotees have got jobs and they tend to just dress in regular clothes and get on with their life without sort of outwardly showing that they're Hare Krishnas. The Indian devotees that have joined the movement are just continuing along as they were before, practicing at home, going to work. So we're not as visible as we used to be. So whenever I've gone on book distribution, or if I talk to people and I say, "Oh, have you heard of Hare Krishna?" Especially young people today, the main response that I get is, "Oh no, what's that?" You know, so we've got this conception that, you know, people think Hare Krishnas are weird. We really have to go out of our way to, as you say, you know, say that, "Oh, we're not weird." But actually, nobody's heard of us. Time has moved on, and you know, whatever hang-ups you might have because of your previous experience a few decades ago, well, those kids were not even alive when that kind of mentality existed, and they don't even know who we are. So we need to become more cultish, basically, so that people will stand out more. In fact, there's a book I was recommended. I won a competition to go to Florida once, so for business. And when I was there, I asked the mentor, Rich Sheffrin, I said, "Can you give me some advice? I'm looking at how to start a movement within a movement." So he first of all recommended me The Purpose-Driven Church. That's where I first heard about it, was from this Rich Sheffrin, business guru. And the second book that he recommended was one called The Culting of Brands. In other words, you know, it's doing the opposite, taking a business and making it into a cult. Like Apple is a bit of a cult, or Harley Davidson was the classic example. So that these businesses are looking at what they, you know, understand as cults and trying to use the cult strategies in their business. And so here we are, we have the opportunity. We're already a cult, you know, let's just double down and milk it.
Since we're in the business of promoting great books to read, I'd really encourage people to read Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. He talks about how to create a social epidemic, how various social epidemics have started. He does use the metaphor of typhoid Mary. So how does an infectious disease spread? But how do infectious ideas spread? And it's a really, really good book for different preaching strategies. Just on the subject of carefully thought out messaging, obviously there's lots of devotees pumping out lots of content. Wisdom of the Sages comes to mind, which is, you know, doing a wonderful job of popularizing the practice of bhakti yoga and so on. It concerns me that ISKCON's leaders are not so much present in that space where they really could be. And most of them seem to be producing content purely for their disciples. So how do they nourish their disciples rather than, you know, how do we reach humanity at large, and what do we have to say on various big global? So I'd love to think we've become a little bit more bold, give ourselves permission. And maybe this is part of the challenge, that in the collective that we have, maybe we're more risk averse than we are bold to, and feeling empowered to make statements, you know, that are, you know, trying to reach the general masses with a point of view. Let's keep going. So devise and implement carefully considered strategies, how we reach all people in all places. what exactly is our proposition to them, and how do we keep them joyfully engaged for life? So this idea of a value proposition is quite a strategic term, I would argue, and we've talked this a little bit in the history that we've done so far. I would say that our value proposition really, really worked in the 60s and 70s. Come and join the movement, change the world. Let's be part of a spiritual revolution. That doesn't appear to have the same appeal. Maybe it could. Maybe it just needs to be slightly repositioned.
No, we've given up that pitch.
But it seems that our proposition has more now sort of evolved into, hey, we run amazing temples with great festivals. Come and do your puja. Come and join in a kirtan. Yeah, and that works for some people. But I think the value proposition to the average Westerner who might stumble into a temple is unclear. Like, why would I want to be a part of this? How do I fit into this? I don't even think we particularly have greeters much of the time. So someone stumbles in and is sort of having to navigate quite a foreign experience without any assistance. So I think this is where Krishna West has particularly looked at, are we just too Indian? The prevalence of Indian faces and bodies, but accompanied with Indian singing and Indian food and Indian architecture and everything Indian. Has that made an unnecessary hurdle to people from other traditions? I think it's a really reasonable question to ask. I do think that India is not as off-putting as maybe Krishna West often positions it. I think, India is certainly something that also is quite attractive to different people. And I think just stripping out all Indian flavor doesn't in itself constitute a strategy. So I think there are certain concerns. But value proposition, what is this offering me that, if I'm a newcomer, what is it inviting me to be a part of exactly? What do I get out of the experience? How do I participate in a way that feels compelling? I don't think we've given too much thought to this. So some people do just naturally, maybe on the strength of reading Prabhupada's books or experiencing some kind of philosophical conversion, they run the gauntlet and they aren't put off by the chaos. But there's not a nice progressive path. Like a lot of organizations in the secular world have things like the customer journey. When you land on our webpage, what do you experience? When you visit our store, what do you experience? And how do we make it such a compelling experience that you'll stay engaged and become a repeat customer, and so on? I don't think we've given too much thought to all of that. I'll pause for your considerations.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I really like about the purpose-driven church model, is that it's very systematic, understanding that people go from the outside, to the inside, and having a clear call to action at each step. In other words, when we meet someone in book, what do we tell them to do? Someone comes to the Sunday feast, what are they meant to do next? Just taking that as a very simple example, people have taken the step of coming to our place. So they've got some favorability there. And when they come, what do we tell them? Do we have a clear call to action for those people? Oh, hi, thanks for coming. I'll see you next week, I guess, But having a clear pathway, like you said, a customer journey. In the purpose-driven church, they have a series of classes that educate people on the key aspects of what the church is about over time, and they sort of can move from stage to stage, so that they can enter the congregation and practice and deepen their practice as time goes by. They don't leave it to chance that people will hopefully figure out what this is all about, because on that Sunday feast, that person might have talked about this, and that Sunday feast, someone spoke about that. There's a systematic program of, I was going to say indoctrination. What's it called? Induction. But it's the same thing, I suppose. So yeah, this is an important element that I really think helps. And like at the loft, I was discussing it with Bajrasane Prabhu, that when we have the Sunday feast, what are we asking people to do? Like, what they need. A lot of times people come along and they come again and again, but they really don't have any sense of what's next. So I said to him, we need to have a clear call to action. What's it going to be? So he said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll do a 21-day challenge, I think is what he called it. So he would give a Sunday feast talk, and he said, all right, so now if you find this interesting, how about I mentor you for the next 21 days and you give this a go. And all it involves is doing some meditation and reading a little bit, and then every day we can just be in touch about how it's going. So he set up a WhatsApp group, and people would just say, yeah, I did my 1 round chanting today, and I read, whatever it was that everyone was meant to read, like a page or something. And then they just share their experience. And so for 21 days, these people were doing it. And many of the people that joined this challenge were people who'd been coming to the loft for quite a long time, but they never felt that there was anything kind of to go on to next. And so when he offered it, immediately, like 20 people signed up for it. And, I think it had great value. And he sort of developed it a bit further even from there after the 21 days for people that wanted to sort of continue that kind of, online type of a connection. But just this idea, and I got this idea particularly emphasized through the Landmark Forum. So I'm not sure if you've ever done any of
I've never participated, I've heard of.
Yeah, you've heard of it for sure, right? So this is how it works. Someone who's doing the Landmark Forum, which is like the foundational program, part of the program is they're told you have to invite someone to the introductory evening, which is on Thursday night or something, right? And so it's like a self-replicating model here. So then you go along to the introduction, and then you get the testimonials about people who have just done the forum and it was amazing and you should definitely do it. It's like the most incredible thing you could ever do, right? So then you're like, okay, I'll put down my $800 or whatever and I'll join the forum. And so you go and do the Landmark Forum. And as soon as you join the Landmark Forum, this like 4-day introductory program, they start telling you that, yeah, this Landmark Forum is pretty good, but the real one is the advanced course. You really should sign up for the advanced course. So the whole thing is like a pitch for the advanced course. And then, naturally you sign up for the advanced course because that's the real thing. Then when you join the advanced course, then you find out that, well, actually the advanced course is pretty good, but there's this next course that's like even better, And so anyway, there's always another step. There's always another level. And I think in the Christian consciousness movement, on a superficial level at least, it's like, oh, well, start chanting. That's the first level, right? Follow the 4 regulative principles, be vegetarian and that kind of stuff. It's like, and if you can do 16 rounds a day and you can maintain it, then you can get initiated. Like, okay, cool. So there's a goal, right? This is something to aim towards. So you get initiated. It's like, all right, okay, I'm initiated now. What's next? Brahman initiation. If I get Brahman initiation, then it means that I get to go up on the altar and everyone can see me while the Abhishek's coming. I mean, it means that I can go on the altar and I can worship the Lord very closely and personally, and I can advance in that way. So I have a goal of Brahman initiation. But then after Brahman initiation, it's kind of like, all right, well, you're on your own now. Good luck. There's no kind of
further progressive path.
Yeah, at least externally, there's nothing as such. I mean, Prabhupada had the idea of this Bhakti Shastri, Bhakti Vaibhav, and these types of Shastra studies, so that could fulfill some of those types of things. But I mean, at a certain point, it's like, okay, well, those are perhaps externals. You could say, okay, I've got Brahman initiation now, and now it's up to me to go deeper in my practice. But it would be nice if there was some pathway that would help devotees to do that, to deepen their practice.
Well, pathways is the main point, isn't it? That we've actually figured out what progressive engagement and whole of life engagement might even look like. Yeah, I must admit I'm a little wary about right, get him in on this one and then sell him on that one, because I feel like, landmark, whatever ideas it may have that benefit people intrinsically, it is business. And we might have slightly different, incentives and so on. But the main idea is, if we're going to use Yukta Vairagya and have an organization, let's go all out. We also talked in that first episode of Prabhupada waking Giriraj Swami and saying, organization and intelligence. So really what we're talking about here is, let's use all the organizational acumen, but in pursuit of Krishna conscious goals. Yeah, I certainly think this idea of joyfully engaged for life, like, did we have a vision beyond getting people to move into the ashram of what further stages in their Krishna conscious journey might look like? Or was it that we used that free labor, and then when it was no longer available because they got married or whatever, we had no plan? So good luck, you're on your own. Now, I'm not suggesting that temples should be responsible for, people's employment and so on, but what if the Brahmachari ashram was all about, yes, there will be some brahmacharis who will stay brahmachari, but what if it was all about setting people up for a great householder life? And what if we were really trying to do the Varnashram thing and saying, well, could we set up a little chamber of commerce to help people get started in business? Other religions do things like that. If we see somebody that we think might even have sort of, real leadership temperament, do we send them on a leadership program, and do we ensure that they're properly trained up to provide great leadership? So it feels like, again, we've got most of the leaders in the sannyas ashram. They actually don't have financial worries, ironically, because they're actually generally quite well off. And I'm all right, Jack. I don't have any issues. So, good luck. The goal might be that one day you'll become just like me and you'll have your, provision. In the meantime, you're just sort of toughing it out in no man's land. I don't really have much to say about the struggles that you have in your life. And the society's not really given any thought to those things. Prabhupada certainly gave thoughts to those things. He thought about agrarian communities where people would meet their economic and community needs in a Krishna conscious way. We've put very little thought into that. So most devotees are struggling in a very adverse economy. Nowadays, 2 incomes may just about keep a modest roof over your head, but you will still be working all the hours that God sends, so it's unfavorable for Krishna consciousness. So again, the main thing is, why aren't leaders racking their brain about this? Is it that they've just got comfy lives of their own, and it's not really a major need in their felt need on their part? They might be sympathetic to people who are struggling out there, but they're not actually doing any design. They're not thinking, what could we do as a society to sort of engineer the kind of world that we want for devotees? And maybe a sannyas would never think that way, which is why it would be helpful to have other ashrams of life, genders, represented at the leadership level, who might in fact understand those concerns and have insight as to what needs to be done in those ways. Let's keep going. So I think this all talks to the need for managerial, interpersonal and devotional competencies. Now, I think that there's a lot more education going on these days. So you'll find workshops by devotees happening all the time. But I don't know that we've got a joined up curricula that's sponsored by the society as such. There may in fact be, a GBC course or even a guru course I gather that there are these kind of courses. I don't know what level of design thinking went into them and how we might measure their efficacy. Have we got more effective leaders and managers as a result? It does worry me that even managerial competencies like good money management and so on, is that something you learn in a sink or swim fashion, almost in a Darwinian, fight for survival? Or have we got a system to educate those who may inherit managerial fiscal responsibilities to discharge them effectively? Even things like good decision making. When we think about how many people are disillusioned because they see poor decision making or unprincipled decision making. By interpersonal, I do mean things like just listening or great conversational skills, and so on. And by devotional, I mean even things like, how are people trained up to be great prasadam cooks? How are people trained up? I think we have good training probably for pujaris. Maybe it's a bit hit and miss when it comes to things like kirtan or things like cooking. But it strikes me that we could do better on these things. We could really be deliberate. Again, if we look at what external organizations do, for each role, they go, what are the competency requirements? And how do we train people to be competent in those areas? They don't leave it to chance. And they have good succession planning to ensure that the future roles go to the right people. I don't get a sense that we have a lot of that in our society. Again, I'll pause for your thoughts.
The big thing that comes to mind here is Varnashram College.
Yeah.
Something that Prabhupada wanted to institute, but it's never really taken off. When you hear Prabhupada describe it, at one level it's like, oh, okay, self-sufficient community is one level of it. But it's not just that. It wasn't just called a Varnashram village or something. It's Varnashram College. Prabhupada wanted it to be an educational facility that trains people certainly how to live off the land and have that aspect of it. But beyond that, it's Varna and Ashrama training. And the interesting thing that I was just reflecting on now is that Prabhupada's vision was that the kids in our Gurukulas would go on to the Varnashram College. And also people from outside would also join the Varnashrama College. It wasn't a different education for our kids and for the people that are coming in. And it's a point that Rumila raises as well. She does a talk based on a series of lectures that Prabhupada gave on brahmachari life and brahmachari training. And what she noticed is that Prabhupada was at one point talking about the brahmacharis, like that we think of today, that have grown up and as young adults have joined the ashram. And at the same time, he's talking about the kids from the age of 5 becoming brahmacharis. And he's sort of like switching backwards and forwards between these two ideas. And that it kind of occurred to me that over time, these things do need to basically merge. That our kids are growing up, they get a certain education, then they're in the Varnashram College. People come from the outside, they go into the Varnashram College. Now, of course, their educational pathway would be slightly different because the ones that come from the Gurukul would have a certain background. And so therefore they would maybe not need to go into certain areas as much as the new people, vice versa. The ones that have come from outside may already have some, this is the point I just need to mention first. She emphasizes that the Gurukul is for developing character and so on, but also a part of Gurukul, Brahmachari Ashram, is getting education for our profession, for being able to maintain ourselves in our household life that comes afterwards. It's not just that you study the scriptures, Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, and all the philosophy, but you don't know how to make a living. You need to have the education side by side. So it seems to me that this Varnashram College is Prabhupada's way of being able to combine these together. That you've got the Shastric education, the philosophy, And then you're also getting the practical education about how you can maintain yourself. And of course, he didn't limit this Varnashram College just to, brahmacharis. Someone married, they can also come to the Varnashram College and learn what they need to learn. But I totally agree that our education is disjointed. There's a workshop on this, a workshop on that, a seminar on this, and all over the place. There's not a systematic path. And yet Prabhupada's, the very first key word in the 7 purposes of ISKCON is systematically. And you've got it up there somewhere on your second point, systematically. And I think this is a point which is really lacking. And I think the Varnashram College is the pivotal point that can bring everything together by seeing what are the needs of each individual and creating this educational institution that can provide it for people so that they get the spiritual things that they need and also whatever material things that they need to continue their spiritual journey throughout their whole life. So this is just a really big point that's come out to me here. Yeah, I think sometimes people get scared about the whole, sustainable living and self-sufficiency and all that kind of thing. But Varnashram College is so much more than that. And you don't necessarily have to start there. You can start wherever you want. We need you to start. That's what today's talk is about, right? Things we need to start doing. And Varnashram College, I think, is one of the most important things that we need to start. Whether it is, okay, you go and live on the land and you learn the skills of, organic farming and subsistence living, and you teach people how to do that. Okay, start there. Or if it's about, okay, let's expand our brahmachari ashram to include education in more practical areas of life so that people have a more supported life pathway, then maybe start there. But we need to start somewhere and do something.
So the other thing I think that may not be called out specifically here, but is a theme that we've spoken about, is also measuring leadership performance and holding people accountable. So I think if a leader was a real despot and mistreating people, there might eventually be a violent coup. I think if a leader just collapses because they're completely out of their depth or transgresses some kind of, horrible moral boundary, although it's not guaranteed in that case, they might be turfed out, or they might just, resign. But someone could still be really incompetent and in place and it not even necessarily get particularly detected. If the finances are okay and they haven't had a coup, they could still be alienating the community. They could still be possibly even making a nice life for themselves using temple finances. And they could be completely ineffective at promoting Krishna consciousness, but they haven't done anything that would catastrophically bring their leadership to an end, and it's not detected. And they could actually be doing quite a lot of damage, but they're in place. So for me, that's just an important part. Arguably, we just need the entire HR function. How do we, appoint people to senior positions? How do we train them? How do we hold them accountable? How do we measure them? All of those things. And how do we even intervene if there's some conduct issue or performance issue or whatever? Let's keep going. So dismantle gender apartheid. Arguably, this one could have been part of the stop doing, but then I've also mentioned about bridging cultural divides, re-engaging the masses. So it's a little bit of repeat maybe from what we've spoken of earlier. But I think the gender apartheid thing is a big deal. And I think I've put it in the must start doing. We really must start affording Vaishnavis opportunities and the ability to participate and contribute that's commensurate with their skills and their commitment, and stop what essentially is discriminatory practices. Not only do the public see them and wonder what on earth century we're from, but it certainly undermines our teachings in many cases. Here they are hearing we're not these bodies, and yet women at the back, or women don't get the same opportunities, and so on. And in terms of bridging cultural divides, I think I'm here talking particularly about the East-West divide. So that has been strained, the relationship between ISKCON and the West, possibly, and ISKCON India for some time. And I don't feel like the leaders are really properly addressing it. At best, they might try and placate India so India doesn't secede from the rest of the society. But in terms of, again, taking a position, where does Gaudiya Vaishnavism stand? Do we have international standards for our society, or are we just happy that discriminatory practices can take place in one region of the world, and they can even be complaining that they're not happening in other parts of the world, as if those discriminations are an essential part of the culture or something? So I do feel this is a really, really big issue. Again, it's such an important population. 50+% of the global population are women. Exactly what is our proposition for women's involvement in the movement? Let's design it and facilitate it, because at the moment it does feel a little bit like suffragettes are still scrambling to be afforded any opportunity to give a class, to lead a kirtan. It's getting better, or it's softening, but it's a long way from looking proportional. Your thoughts? Stumped.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting subject because in the West there's I'm not sure where to start with this even. Yeah, just the thought that comes to mind, which is perhaps fits into the equation exactly, but encouraging and in the West, the value of motherhood is undervalued, I would say. And so without having some artificial apartheid, as you put it, encouraging and recognizing and appreciating the contribution that mothers make, I think is really important. So I feel that part of the issue here is that in the West, women are considered not that they're not doing anything, they're just raising children and just doing the more traditional roles. So on the one hand, you've got in India, there may be this imposition that, in the traditional role, women only do this, and therefore you cannot have a position in this temple council or whatever it might be. And then on the other hand, those that have been brought up in the West, which Prabhupada criticized a lot, the kind of feminist kind of viewpoint, is that, if you're just a mother, that's not enough. And so I think there needs to be some more appreciation of the value that mothers have in families. And also, this ties in together in terms of what Prabhupada talked about, the importance of keeping families together. Because just from the point of view of statistics, unmarried men are the biggest cause of crime. And
biggest cause of
crime.
Yeah.
And when you look at those who commit crimes, the ones that do them, like there's this program that came out recently, Adolescence, which is received some criticism because it's the person that they've put as their kind of role model criminal doesn't represent the type of person that generally does the type of crimes that he did. The biggest demographic that does, violent crime is boys from families without fathers. And so I think that reaffirming not just the role of mother, but also the importance of wife and helping to create a good environment for kids to grow up is really important. And that's one thing which is right in the middle of this whole East-West divide.
No, it's very true, and I think that properly honoring the role of a mother, the role of the family, is a huge need. The question is whether we're limiting Vaishnavis, that literally that's the sum and substance of your role. You shouldn't aspire to contribute in any other way. In fact, you should be prohibited from, in fact, any other kind of contribution is possibly a violation of chastity. That's how far it goes, and that feels very archaic. Not that even it being a part of the old world was ever right either. It does seem inconsistent with the idea of honoring the soul first and foremost, and that the soul is not the soul's value and the soul's worthiness in contributing to the Krishna consciousness movement is defined by the body they inhabit. Imagine if we had some rule that said black devotees can only do these things and not these other things. It would be shocking and outrageous. And of course, it wasn't so long ago that was exactly the situation in many societies around the world. For some reason, we still seem to have not, like for instance, the GBC did come up with a yes, Vaishnavis can initiate, and then immediately backed off when India arced up about it. Now, are we able to confidently take a position based on a philosophy or not? Because it seems at the moment that it's more bully boy tactics. Yes, there might be certain philosophical arguments that are also used, and it would be great to see that debate fully exhausted and a conclusion arrived at. And to some extent, the GBC may have even attempted to do that with their Shastric advisory paper. And obviously the legitimacy of some of the arguments were then challenged. But it seems at the moment we are still in a holding position where our official position is, yes, they can initiate, but we're putting a pause on it because India are a bit upset about that. And so we need to keep researching. And I have no dispute that the family unit is important, that there are excesses maybe by feminism and other woke areas in society and so on, and that Lord Chaitanya also created a culture where upadhis did not define someone's contribution to the Krishna consciousness movement. And so, yeah, at least let's sort of get to a conclusion, please.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my kind of angle on it related to these guru type issues. It's a bit anarchistic, but that's, the Shastra, I mentioned this previously, the Shastric Advisory Committee did a research about what were the oversights in terms of who can get initiated by who. And it boiled down to the fact that the guru and the disciple should assess each other for 1 year before, taking Diksha or something like that. And
Which is Haribhakti Vilas, Sanatana Goswami.
Yeah, and there was no mention anywhere of any managerial oversight, because I guess there were no organizations as we have now. So, but I think that the relationship of guru and disciple is A, personal, and B, I just think there's too much overemphasis on Diksha. Like the person, Diksha involves the 5 samskaras. It means giving a name, giving the tulsi bead, tilak, giving a mantra for worshipping the deity, and then engaging in deity worship. So it's kind of like a formality, really, the Diksha, but the Shiksha is the real thing. But there's still so much overemphasis on Diksha And from my point of view, if anyone wants to get initiated by whoever they want to get initiated by, provided they're already in the parampara, then that's Diksha. And it's not the be all and end all that people seem to make it out to be. Really, at the end of the day, it's the Shiksha. Shiksha means Prabhupada's instructions in his books as the founder Acharya, and the instruction that we get from the devotees that we're living with, the senior devotees who are giving us advice, that we're actually in contact with on a day-to-day basis. You look at Jayapataka Swami, he's initiated like 100 million, 1,000, koti, trillion disciples. Does each of them have like a personal kind of shiksha relationship? Or has he basically signed them up as official members of ISKCON by giving them Diksha? And in my reading of Prabhupada's conversations about the Ritvik idea, it seems to me that he wasn't all that concerned about who was giving initiation in terms of Diksha. He was more concerned that their name would be written in the book as a kind of like a formal membership. But the real thing is the Shiksha that comes from Prabhupada's books and from the devotees that we interact with. So it's a bit of a tangent, but that's my kind of where I'm at at the moment.
I don't think it's a tangent, and I'm mindful we're down to our last few minutes of your available time. I think you're bridging the next bullet point, which is talking about rekindling the sense of entrepreneurship and empowerment. And I mentioned there specifically, Amara Gaya Guru Hoya Tara Eidesh. So the same instruction we dealt with in the very first episode, given to Kurma Brahman, you become a guru on my order. And so, yes, it does still feel like, even though it's a larger club, it's a bit of an exclusive club. It's very prestigious if you happen to be a member of the club. It is focused exclusively around Diksha, even though they may also give Shiksha. But then it naturally excludes so many other sources of guidance. And to me, surely if we've got sort of a preaching orientation, would be enthused to equip anyone willing to preach and able to preach. Obviously, we might have some sense of, are they preaching, Prabhupada's message unchanged and those kind of things? Are they representing the Siddhanta properly? But why would we hold anybody back? Why wouldn't we get completely behind them? Why wouldn't we want as many people to have the franchise as possible to facilitate? Arguably, every town and every village needs a resident source of guidance. So, anyone who's running a Bhakti Rickshaw club in some sense is a guru.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't we properly honor that? Why would we almost want to keep a special reverence for those who give Diksha? I can see how those who might currently be in the club would probably like the club to stay a little bit restricted. But I don't think that's in line with expansionist thinking. Prabhupada did give that one lecture where he talks about having tens of thousands of gurus, and that he wants everybody to, inherit that responsibility. Sorry, Krishna.
Yeah, I don't really see a downside in it. The system that's been until now, which has been exclusive, hasn't been all that great.
If you're a franchise holder with some turf, maybe you see a downside to it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, it's basically, that's the only thing I can see. I mean, because this, by, what's the word, democratizing Diksha, or whatever you want to say, it opens it up and puts more focus on the Shiksha gurus, because it also removes that whole parallel lines of authority issue, which is like, oh, my Diksha guru, therefore I do whatever my Diksha guru says, and if my temple president or the GBC says something else, then I ignore them and do what my guru says, and you get this kind of confusing issue. But if the Diksha is not given the undue emphasis that it is now, I think it brings everything more in line with the natural shiksha flow.
Let's cover off these last couple of points so we can let you get on with your day. So in many ways, we've already talked about this building out the vital social infrastructure, so the Varnashram College and Varnashram practice and so on. The movement is never meant to just be a confederation of temples. Temples are an important institution in the social infrastructure. They're not the only institution in the social infrastructure. Arguably, even an ashram deserves some design thinking. As we said, what's the curriculum, what's the proposition, and so on. And then, yes, if we're talking about farming communities, we might even be talking about having a mayor who's taking a Kshatriya-like orientation to all of the needs in a particular community, not only, the temple roster and so on. And obviously, good businesses that potentially would benefit from good support. And even, just like now we have some dating websites for devotees, why wouldn't we have an employment website for a devotee? And other things that are about meeting all of people's needs. Why wouldn't there be particular charitable institutions for devotee housing, or all kinds of things that actually need social infrastructure? And again, social infrastructure will likely be something that someone with a vision for society would consider. Someone who's socially dead, a sannyasi, may think, again, what's wrong with the world? I've got a steady flow of interested souls who come and hear my talks. Life is good. They may not be thinking about social infrastructure. Prabhupada, on the other hand, did think about social infrastructure. And I think there's a big clue there as to what leaders of the movement should be considering part of their obligations.
Yeah, this brings up a topic which has come up from time to time, and someone just mentioned it to me the other day. That there's a feeling that, I never do business with devotees. And then some people might have had bad experiences with particular devotees that were not responsible or not honest or something. But if we are to actually grow into Prabhupada's vision of transforming the world, then we need to support each other. And if you look at a particular group of people, let's take the Jewish community, for example, they have a principle that they only do business with their own community. So the idea is that the money flows into their community, it doesn't flow out of the community, and this gives a financial basis for what they want to do. And if you look at the Jewish community, it's incredible. The number of Jews in the world is very small, but the influence of those Jews is incredible because they've been very strategic and they've supported each other within their community. They control the media, they control practically all the governments of the world. They're very successful in business. And in so many ways, the influence of Jewish people is incredible, even though there's a small number of them, to the point where they're able to arrange things that they've got their own country in the Middle East, which is quite amazing, which was a multi-generational project. But the point is that we have a similar kind of a vision that we want to have a transformation. So we should learn from others who have had influence and see how it was done. And a big part of it was supporting each other through business and having that foundation of economics and being very strategic as well.
Well, and your point is that we shouldn't just be thinking of ourselves as a church, but we're civilization builders. So in some ways, being pioneers in the Western world, why wouldn't we think a little bit like pioneers that have landed in a place and want to colonize it? I don't mean all of the word colonizing probably has issues. We might even have people who take issue with your use of the Jewish community there as well. But this idea that how do we set ourselves up for enduring intergenerational success should absolutely be what we're thinking of here. Yeah, so I must stress that I think there's been a lot of entrepreneurial activity by individual devotees still, but the fact that things be more coordinated and actively facilitated and joined up, this is where I really hope to see leaders step up rather than have a relatively narrow set of concerns, to think more broadly and to lead more broadly. So it brings us sort of to that last point. And, you know, one of our themes all along is that ISKCON isn't the only representative of the parampara, the sampradaya. So, you know, have we come to a time where there might be more active cooperation with other sanghas? Could there even be a multi-sangha leadership body? But certainly leadership of all kinds is the main factor here. And strategy is the result of what a leader brings to a community. So when I studied under Stephen Covey, and I actually first came across the 4 roles of leadership when I'd just become the TP at the Manor. And I found it really amazing. 4 roles that a leader plays: modeling, exemplifying the values, earning trust, you know, being someone that is super credible is the central role of a leader. Pathfinding, where do we need to head to next? What's the vision for our society? How do we engage people in the vision? Aligning, which is designing the infrastructure to support the vision. And empowering, or engaging with people so effectively that all of the talent is infused to serve the mission or to serve the organization. These 4 roles: modeling, pathfinding, aligning, and empowering. It's a really fascinating model. And I'd love it if we had the kind of leadership competence that recognizes that. You know, it's great that a leader perhaps does public sadhana. I think increasingly many of them are not doing public sadhana, okay? And goes to the morning program and sets those kind of examples. That's great. It's great that they're ready to speak on Krishna consciousness and so on. But I'd love to see more of them actually tending to the organization and the needs of the community, current and future. That to me is what leadership's really about. Anyway, I'll pause for your thoughts. I'm mindful that we need to wind up very soon.
Yeah, those 4 points that you brought up: modeling, pathfinding, aligning, and empowering, like just those
Yep.
4 things is a model that we could have a whole discussion about our society, just looking at those one by one. It's a great framework.
Yeah, funny enough, there is actually an earlier talk. I think it was part of Virtualist Agosti some while back, so I might post it in the clip, where Akura, as in Gita Seva Akura, and I are talking exactly about those models and the organizational effectiveness cycle. But yeah, look, this might be a part of future discussions too. I want to thank everybody who's watched the series. I hope it's been useful. What we've attempted to do is invite you to think about the part you play in the movement, certainly in emphasizing the big responsibility of leaders. We're not trying to nullify the role that you can play as an individual. And in terms of thinking about the future, I mean, I use the term co-creation, and we define this a little bit in the first episode. We're not the creators. Krishna is the creator. But we can, as parts and parcels of his, invested with some creative capacity, we can think about how well do I understand Krishna's intentions? How well am I able to align my skills in the Lord's service, my thinking skills, my industrious skills, and so on. And so we can also play a part in understanding the needs of the society and shaping it going forwards. I obviously think there's a special role for leaders to play in strategy. The first few episodes, we looked at how the movement has fared since Lord Chaitanya started it, what principles he baked in, what things challenged the movement's health at various times, and what things really promoted its health at various times in the past. We've looked at history to see if we could learn lessons from it, and also to make peace with it a little bit, so that we don't continue possibly to be scarred and disabled by it, but actually use it as a springboard for going forwards. We've looked at things that we currently do that probably go quite well, and we could do more to magnify and amplify. We've looked at things that really inhibit the movement's growth and we need to eliminate. And this episode today, we looked at things that we might start to do, or do a whole bunch more of, or do more deliberately, or whatever. Certainly not the end of the conversation. We actually hope it launches more conversation. There may be future episodes. We'd certainly welcome any further comments that anybody has. Please share if you think that this is a useful series for others. Krishnendu, I wanted to thank you for being an ever-present in all of these discussions and being insightful and thoughtful all the way through. It's an honor to know you and to be a collaborator with you in topics like this. I'll see what closing words you might have for everybody.
Yeah, I just like to reaffirm the amazing gift that Prabhupada has given us in coming to the West in particular, and it's gone back to India and all over the world. This vision that he had for the Krishna consciousness movement, which is encapsulated in the 7 purposes of ISKCON. And it's up for each of us to take up some leadership at whatever level we can to try to help that vision become a reality. So that's my inspiration, and for me that's the conclusion of this talk. And amongst all the details, this is the way I see it.
Massive thank you to everybody, and stay tuned. I'm sure there will be more that comes from the Virtualista Ghosty channel over time. Hare Krishna.